For thousands of years, artists painted it, preachers described it, movies imagined it. A war so vast that heaven itself became a battlefield. Millions believe they already know exactly how it happened. Lucifer rebelled. Michael fought. 1/3 of the angels fell. But here's the question almost nobody asks. How much of that story is actually written in the Bible? If you opened scripture today searching for the greatest war in existence, would you find the epic battle we've all imagined, or something far more mysterious? Because the deeper you look, the stranger it becomes. The Bible gives us fragments, a delayed messenger, a disputed body, a fallen morning star, a dragon, a war described in only 2 sentences. Everything else may have been built in the silence. Before the first human drew breath, before the oceans were formed or the stars were cast into the dark, the greatest war in existence tore through heaven itself. But here is the mystery. Does the Bible actually describe that cosmic war, or did later generations fill the silence with tradition? Today we separate what Scripture actually says from what human imagination added in the silence. Picture a realm of impossible scale, a dimension unbound by the physics of our universe, lit by a radiance that casts terrifying high-contrast shadows. Here, a colossal figure stands as an unyielding sentinel in a throne room without walls. The book of Daniel names him Michael, the great prince and the guardian of a future nation. But Daniel gives us only a fractured, terrifying glimpse. The year is approximately 536 BC. The prophet Daniel is an old man, living in exile on the banks of the Tigris River. The empire of Babylon has fallen, replaced by the rising might of Medo-Persia. For 3 full weeks, Daniel has been fasting, mourning the state of his captive people, staring into the dark waters of the river, waiting for an answer from the divine. When the answer finally comes, it is not a gentle whisper. Daniel describes a being of overwhelming terror, a figure dressed in linen, his waist wrapped in the gold of Uphaz. His body is like topaz, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, and his voice like the roar of a massive multitude. The sheer presence of this entity causes the men with Daniel to flee in blind terror, leaving the ancient prophet to collapse face forward into the dirt, entirely drained of strength. When the messenger speaks, he reveals something that fundamentally reshapes our understanding of the cosmos. He tells Daniel that he was dispatched the very first day the prophet began to pray. Yet he was blocked. He was intercepted in the unseen spiritual realm for 21 agonizing days by a hostile entity he calls the Prince of the Kingdom of Persia. Many interpreters understand this figure as a spiritual power associated with the Persian Empire rather than a human ruler. The messenger admits he was trapped in this cosmic stalemate until reinforcements arrived, and those reinforcements came in the form of one figure, Michael, one of the chief princes. It required Michael's overwhelming intervention to finally break the supernatural siege. What unseen, catastrophic resistance could hold back a heavenly messenger for 3 weeks? What weapons were used in a battle between principalities in the unseen realm? The ancient scroll refuses to elaborate. It gives us only the shadows of a massive conflict happening just above the clouds, and then it simply moves on. That single passage changes how many readers understand spiritual warfare, but it still doesn't explain how the conflict began. Centuries later, a second fragment surfaces in the obscure, single-chapter Book of Jude. It offers another cinematic glimpse into the dark, referencing an event found nowhere in the Old Testament. Jude describes Michael the Archangel, locked in a fierce, face-to-face dispute with the devil himself over the physical, earthly remains of the prophet Moses. According to ancient Jewish tradition, when Moses died overlooking the Promised Land, God buried the prophet in an unmarked grave to prevent the Israelites from turning his bones into an idol. But Jude reveals that the location of that grave was contested. The devil attempted to claim the body. There is no preamble to this confrontation. There is no sprawling battlefield described, no clash of heavenly swords. There is just one startling sentence. Jude notes that even a being as powerful as Michael did not dare to bring a slanderous accusation against the devil, but simply said, "The Lord rebuke you." And then the text abruptly cuts to black. 2 verses. 2 fleeting, fractured glimpses of an epic conflict happening just outside the frame of human understanding. These glimpses reveal that an unseen war surrounds human history, yet Scripture leaves the origin of the enemy completely out of frame. But that wasn't the full story. If you are drawn to uncovering the forgotten history behind Scripture and the epic mysteries that time left behind, subscribe to Ancient Echoes and join our expedition into the shadows of the ancient world. To find the spark of the rebellion, we must travel back to the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah directed a scathing, poetic taunt at a dead Babylonian king, a mortal tyrant who had oppressed the nations. To mock this king's arrogance, Isaiah reaches for the most dramatic, apocalyptic imagery the ancient Hebrew language could hold, a morning star plummeting from the highest heavens. "How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn, you have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations." Isaiah's oracle describes a being who looked upon the ultimate throne and decided that proximity was no longer enough. The prophet records the internal monologue of this arrogant figure. "I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will make myself like the Most High." When the scholar Jerome translated this Hebrew poetry into the Latin Vulgate in the late 4th century, he looked at the Hebrew phrase Hallel ben Shahar, which translates to "shining one, son of the dawn." To capture this in Latin, Jerome chose a single infamous word, Lucifer, the light-bearer. Modern historical scholars insist that Isaiah's original audience heard nothing more than a political insult aimed at a dying Babylonian empire. But generations of early readers saw something else. They saw the massive silhouette of something far older lurking behind the poetry. They connected Isaiah's words to another terrifying prophecy found in the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel, like Isaiah, was prophesying against a mortal ruler, the king of Tyre, a wealthy, arrogant maritime empire. But Ezekiel's language suddenly shifts from describing a human king to describing an entity that defies earthly logic. Listen to the impossible imagery Ezekiel uses. "You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone adorned you. You were anointed as a guardian cherub, for so I ordained you. You were on the holy mount of God. You walked among the fiery stones." The text continues, detailing the exact moment the perfection broke. "You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created till wickedness was found in you. So I drove you in disgrace from the mount of God, and I expelled you, guardian cherub, from among the fiery stones." This was no human ruler of Tyre. No mortal man had ever walked in the Garden of Eden draped in jewels, nor stood as an anointed cherub among the fiery stones of God's mountain. When early readers placed Ezekiel's corrupted cherub next to Isaiah's falling morning star, a terrifying origin story was born. They envisioned a blinding radiance twisting into furious rage, an entity declaring a coup against the Creator. These prophetic taunts provided the raw materials for a story of heavenly rebellion, yet neither prophet explicitly states that they are describing the fall of Satan. What happened next changed everything. This habit of reading cosmic horror into earthly events fundamentally changed how we view our own ancient history. Consider the earliest catastrophe of the human race, a garden and an unnamed serpent. If you ask most readers today who the serpent in the Garden of Eden was, they will immediately answer, Satan. But look closely at the text of Genesis 3. Genesis describes a cunning, wild reptile that deceives Eve. It focuses entirely on human choice, temptation, and consequence. The text never explicitly names Lucifer. It never mentions a fallen angel. It never uses the word Satan. In fact, the image of a fallen angel hiding within a coiled form was absent from early Hebrew scripture. In the earliest books of the Old Testament, the word Satan was not a proper name. It was a title, Ha-Satan, the adversary, or the accuser. In the book of Job, this accuser still has access to the heavenly courts, acting almost like a divine prosecutor. He is not yet depicted as the ruler of a fiery underworld or the architect of a heavenly war. So how did the cunning snake of Genesis transform into the fallen archangel of the cosmic war. The shift happened during the Second Temple period, as Jewish writers grappled deeply with the origin of evil. They looked at the suffering of the world and realized that human corruption alone wasn't enough to explain it. There had to be an unseen power behind the curtain. Texts like the ancient, non-canonical Book of Enoch emerged. Its themes became influential in some strands of Second Temple Jewish thought and shaped how many later readers understood spiritual beings and the origin of evil. By the New Testament era, many readers increasingly understood the serpent through the broader biblical portrait of Satan as the ancient enemy. Scripture left the origins of the serpent unwritten, leaving an open doorway that later tradition was eager to enter. As we examine how ancient writers pieced this mystery together, what has surprised you most so far about the difference between biblical text and later tradition? The next passage completely changes the picture. At the very end of the biblical canon, penned by an exiled apostle on the prison island of Patmos, the curtain is violently torn back. The book of Revelation is the only place in the entire biblical text where the exact phrase, "war in heaven," is explicitly recorded. The Apostle John is granted a vision of the spiritual reality operating behind the Roman Empire. Picture a cinematic nightmare, skies boiling with unseen, violent energy. John describes a great sign appearing in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, crying out in childbirth, and standing in front of her is an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns. The dragon's tail sweeps a third of the stars out of the sky and flings them to the earth. And then, in Revelation chapter 12, verse 7, the ancient conflict erupts into full view. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. For a moment, the silence is broken. We are finally given the climactic battle. But look closely at how the text describes the fight. There are no descriptions of clashing swords. There are no detailed troop movements. There is no battlefield geometry, no triumphant final blow delivered by a glowing blade. The text provides an ending utterly devoid of martial details. The forces clash and the outcome is stated flatly as an unchangeable fact. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth and his angels with him. Revelation explicitly declares the dragon's defeat, yet leaves the entire physical description of the cosmic battle unwritten. Then Scripture reveals something unexpected. Out of those brief, flatly delivered sentences, humanity constructed 2,000 years of art. We painted massive cathedral ceilings with clashing wings. We sculpted angels driving spears into the jaws of demons. The most famous architectural blueprint of this war doesn't even come from the Bible. It comes from the year 1667, when an English poet named John Milton published Paradise Lost. It was Milton, writing in blank verse, who gave us the epic dialogue of the fallen angels. It was Milton who detailed the artillery of heaven, the geography of hell, and the tragic, rebellious heroism of Lucifer, proclaiming, "Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven." Milton's poetry was so powerful, so incredibly cinematic, that it fundamentally overwrote the cultural memory of the Bible. Today, when most people describe the war in heaven, they are not quoting the book of Revelation. They are quoting Paradise Lost. Much of what modern culture envisions when thinking of the war in heaven comes not from the apostles or prophets, but from the quill of a 17th century poet. But another ancient text complicates the mystery. The true terror of Revelation 12 does not lie in the battle itself. It lies in the verse that follows, shifting the war zone from the eternal heights directly into our fragile reality. A loud voice in heaven declares, "Woe to the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath because he knows that his time is short." This grand conflict was never truly finished. It merely changed address. It descended from the courts of heaven and embedded itself in the soil, the politics, and the hearts of the human race. And waiting at the threshold of this ongoing disaster is the great prince, Michael. Across millennia, he remains a colossal figure in human consciousness. Daniel prophesied that this guardian will rise again during a future time of trouble. For centuries, Christian art has painted him with a blazing sword, his foot planted firmly on the neck of absolute darkness. He stands in the exact place where the light of the eternal realm meets the shadows of our own. Strip away the sprawling epics. Strip away Milton's poetry, Dante's Inferno, and the soaring frescoes of the Renaissance. What is the actual biblical foundation for the greatest cosmic war ever fought? It is shockingly brief. 2 sentences in Revelation, 6 verses in Isaiah, a lament in Ezekiel, and a handful of passing whispered references in Daniel and Jude. Everything else, every battle cry, every clash of wings, every word Lucifer or Michael supposedly spoke to one another, was built afterward by generations who stared into the profound silence of Scripture and simply could not leave it alone. The silence itself became part of the story. Where Scripture spoke briefly, generations of believers, artists, and theologians tried to imagine what happened between the lines. So we return to our central question. Did the Bible actually describe the war in heaven the way most people imagine, or did later generations fill the silence with tradition? The answer is both sobering and profound. Scripture gives us the absolute reality of the conflict, the certainty of God's victory, and the urgency of human choice, while intentionally holding back the dramatic mechanics of angelic warfare. Revelation does not end with this cosmic war. It ends with the promise of a new heaven and a new earth, a place where the ancient conflict is permanently, finally closed. Until that day arrives, the line drawn in the ancient sands of Babylon is still being drawn today, in every generation forced to choose between pride and loyalty. Some silences in Scripture were never meant to be completely filled. They were meant to remind us that we are part of a story vastly larger than ourselves, and that not every mystery has been revealed yet. Thank you for venturing into the unknown with us. If this exploration of Scripture's deepest mysteries captivated you, please subscribe to Ancient Echoes. We encourage you to like and share this video if you found it valuable. After everything you've heard today, what do you believe the Bible actually teaches about the war in heaven? Let us know in the comments below, and prepare yourselves, because next time we will plunge into the dark, violent waters of another historical silence, reaching back to the dawn of creation to unearth the lost leviathans of the ancient world. History remembers the events. Scripture reveals the truth. The silence between them is where Ancient Echoes begins.